The bones of a king. Under a parking lot, an ancient skeleton lay buried in the middle of town, not in a coffin or even in a cemetery, but beneath a parking lot. An archaeologist gently scraped away the dirt that hid the skeleton's spine. The burial spot was strange, but then so was the spine, for two reasons. First, the spine was crooked, with a striking S-curve. Second, this particular spine belonged to a famous king. Before that fall day in 2012, when researchers found the bones of King Richard III beneath a parking lot in Leicester, England. He had lain hidden for more than 525 years, but how could the researchers know for sure that it was Richard? Ancient history led the way, and modern science followed. Beneath the search, finding the king's long concealed body beneath the city parking lot wasn't an accident. Thanks to historical records, researchers knew that beneath the plain parking lot lay the buried ruins of Greyfriars Priory, a monastery where Catholic monks lived from 1255 to the late 1530s. A medieval historian recorded Richard as having been buried in the priory after he died in a battle at nearby Bosworth Field in August of 1485. Richard's side had lost both the battle and the throne, so claiming his body was probably a brave thing for the monks to do. Signs indicate that he was buried quickly. His skull was jammed upright so he could fit in a grave that was slightly too small to hold his body. There was no coffin, and although the grave was in a position to honor near the church's high altar, it was unmarked and under the monastery floor. Just over 50 years later, in 1538, as a direct result of who lost and who won that day, the abbey at Greyfriars was destroyed and in time covered over as the town grew. When modern researchers were looking for Richard, the church had been buried for nearly as long as he had. They consulted old maps, but in the centuries that followed the abbey's destruction, street names had changed. It took some detective work to locate the precise burial site. Even after they found the burial site, almost nobody expected the archaeologists to find a skeleton inside. Not even the archaeologists themselves. By some ancient accounts, Richard's body hadn't been buried at all, but had instead been thrown to the river Soar after being paraded through the streets of Leicester. As soon as the archaeologists found the skeleton, though, they were pretty certain who it belonged to. When the bones expert saw the gash in the skull and the twisted spine, he said the hair on the back of his neck stood up. This was King Richard III. Ancient history. Richard died in 1485 at the Battle of Bosworth Field, a few miles from Leicester. After leading a direct charge through his enemy, Henry Theodore Richard lost his horse on slippery ground, was overrun by Henry's soldiers and lost his life. His throne fell alongside his body. Historical accounts of the battle mention the fatal blows that struck Richard. The skeleton under the parking lot shows similar signs to the injury: 10 bones with 8 to the skull. The wound that killed him was likely a large skull fracture behind his left ear. He was the last English king to fall in battle. Henry Tudor led the triumphant procession that brought Richard back into town. His body slung over the back of the horse, Richard was left to lie in the town square for 2 days as proof that he was dead, and Henry was now the king. This disrespectful display of his body also revealed his crooked back for all to see. In Shakespeare's play Richard III, Richard is depicted as a hunchback with a raised right shoulder, something a crooked spine would cause. In the play, this deformity is more cause for scorn than sympathy. In real life, it's another matter. At the time, Richard's spine began to bend, probably between the ages of 10 and 12. Doctors may have known the cause, but they certainly wouldn't have known how to help him. As a result, Richard's crooked spine made him stand inches shorter than his true height of 5 feet 8 inches, taller than most individual men. As an adult, he probably lived with a near constant pain. Centuries later, we now know that Richard suffered scoliosis. When archaeologists found the skeleton, the first lifted their arms, legs, and skull from the gravesite. When they finally reached the torso and saw the crooked spine, they knew they had found Richard. Modern science. Everything ancient history could tell the researchers suggest that this skeleton belonged to Richard III. Now they turn to modern science to confirmation. By studying the bones, scientists soon learned that they came from a man around the age of 32, Richard's age when he died. They could also tell the skeleton's owner had enjoyed a high-protein diet rich in meat and ocean fish. In the 15th century, only the wealthy, a king or, for instance, ate that well. Finally, by using carbon dating tests on 2 ribs, they learned that the skeleton belonged to someone who died between 1455 and 1540. Richard died in 1485. Scientists also considered DNA, the information in the skull cells that determines many of our traits. Less than 2% of the English population carries the particular type of DNA they took from the skeleton. When they took DNA samples from 2 modern-day descendants of Richard's sister, Anne or York, the samples matched. Honor for the king. With the recovery of Richard's bone, some people were delegated by the long-lost king could now be reburied with traditional honors. But where to bury him? Within 24 hours of the DNA confirmation, 2 towns claimed his body. In Leicester, officials wanted to bury the bones barely 100 yards from where they were found. In Leicester Cathedral, they wanted to open a visitor center dedicated to Richard. Richard hails from the northern city of York. Though 100 miles from Leicester, some insisted that Richard would have wanted to to be buried there. Other people felt strongly that Richard, regardless of the disputed place in English history, should have been buried in London's Westminster Abbey, along with other British monarchs. After much consideration and debate, officials finally decided on Leicester Cathedral for her burial. The tomb was unveiled to the public in March 2015. Villain or victim? Opinions are now divided about about what sort of man Richard was. We know that he met a violent end, but Richard deserved what he got. For centuries after his death, Richard was more despised than any other English king. Shakespeare's play Richard III depicts him as a limping, deformed, and haunted. Yet Shakespeare never knew the king. He wrote the play more than a century after Richard died. Indeed, Shakespeare wrote the Regent of Tudors, Richard's enemies. Some argue that both the Tudors and Shakespeare wronged Richard III, that he was a victim of the propaganda, and that what they said and wrote about Richard made him seem worse than he was. We may never know for sure. What we do know is this. In 1483, Richard's older brother, King Edward IV, died, probably from pneumonia. Richard had always been royal to his brother, so before Edward died, he named Richard to be royal protector of his eldest son, who in time would have become Edward V of England. Instead, Richard ascended the throne and began consolidate power for himself. He imprisoned his brother's two sons, Edward and Richard. In the Tower of London, the young princes were never seen again. 2 years into Richard's reign, the battle for control of England between Richard's forces and the followers of Henry Tudor took place at Bosworth Field. Betrayed by men he thought were his supporters, Richard was killed while fighting desperately on foot after losing his horse. His crown was picked up from where it had fallen, and Henry Tudor was crowned king for England on the battlefield, becoming King Henry VII. Years later, in 1534, Henry's son, Henry VIII, broke with the Catholic Church and dissolved the monasteries. This act led to destruction after loss in Greyfriars Priory, where centuries later Richard's skeleton was uncovered. The rest of the story is not so clear. After Henry VII took the throne, rumors raged about Richard and what might have happened to the two young princes in the tower. Maybe Richard ordered their murder. Maybe they lived for 2 years. Richard lived for the 2 years Richard reigned as king, but they were later killed by the new king, Henry VII, who had killed Richard. Maybe they were smuggled out for the country to safety. Today, fans of Richard III believe that the discovery of his skeleton may cause people to change their opinions about his medieval king. They believe he has strong sympathy for the rights of common people and that he established many principles of modern law. They include the ideas of defendants must be considered innocent until proven guilty, that the defendants have true right to bail, and that all laws must be known and published becomes of Richard now could change how his history is told. As the saying goes, history is written by victors. After losing both his life and throne about 525 years ago, Richard may have scored significant victory after all, for from a shallow grave hidden in their parking lot.